Good evening and welcome to this redox molecule animal webinar. My name is Beth Wofford. I'm joining you from Rimrock Farm in Lexington, Kentucky. This evening, I'd like to share our experiences with the redox signaling molecules and our horses. My husband, Bill, and I have been in business for almost 40 years, riding and training thoroughbred racehorses. For the horsemen with us tonight, I'm going to quickly run through some of my credentials in the horse world. It won't mean a lot to the rest of you, but just to show you where I come from in the horse world. I started riding professionally in hunters and jumpers when I was 14. I moved on to eventing, which when I met my husband in my late teens, which was way more fun. While I was in college, I was an exercise rider at our local racetrack. I'd gallop horses in the morning and then go to classes in the afternoon. And in the process, I found out, and this process of all these years, I found out that I really love, what I love most is working with babies, with real young horses, starting them for the first time, putting saddles and bridles on for the first time. So that is how our business evolved. We now when young horses come to us, they've never had saddles and bridles on before. I line drive them, I belly up on them, and eventually within about a month, they're galloping in a field. So I've been hurt a lot working with horses, and I have been very blessed because miraculously my body has healed back 100% every single time. So very early on, I grew to have an enormous respect for the body's capacity to heal itself, given the proper tools. So when I heard about the redox signaling system and our products, in February of 2010, it's been over 7 years now, was blessed to hear about it quite early. I just lit up about the science. I thought it was the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen, and I knew that I wanted to continue to be as healthy as I could possibly be for as long as possible, and I just loved it. But I also knew that this product was very safe and non-toxic. So of course, my mind immediately went to all our animals because that's where I automatically go. So I started experimenting with everybody, 2 and 4 legs. I have a little confession in the spirit of transparency. I need to tell you that early on, I didn't think about taking photos of what occurred, and it was really impressive. So what I did this week is I went online and I found some photos that were very closely simulate what happened. But just bear with me. I want you to know these aren't mine. So I just have to be honest. Part of what happens when I get a group of young horses in is it's just like teaching preschool. It's just like they come to school for the first time. They've never been away from their farm of origin. They get very stressed out. They scream and holler. They don't know where their friends are. They're really stressed. And that, of course, often triggers an immune response in the body. And they come down with maybe a cough or sniffles, or commonly in horses, they get what I call goopy eyes, where their eyes look like this. I had a filly that came in one day and she looked just like this. Her eye was swollen up. She could only open it about halfway. The conjunctive tissue you see here is all red and kind of angry, and it was all draining this goopy stuff. And she was not happy. She was not feeling well. Sadly, when you administer ophthalmic ointment to a horse with traditional medicine, it's really nasty. It comes in these little tubes, and the little applicator is real sharp and pointy, and you have to put it in the corner of their eye and kind of inside their eyelid, and they hate it, and it bothers me to do it, let alone them. They don't like it. It's uncomfortable for them. So instead of doing that, I thought, hey, I wonder if maybe these molecules would work. So I knew I had this little spray bottle. This again is a reenactment that I just did this last week to show how I spray horses' eyes. But I had this little spray bottle. I knew that it helped people with their eyes when you spray them, and it certainly felt great in my eyes. So I thought at the very least it's going to make her feel better, and it'll clean the eye out. It'll help clear it. And I know it probably will help her feel a little better, even if it doesn't do anything else. So I saturated the eye completely. I just drenched it, and I opened her eyelids and I squirted it into her right into her on her eyeball. And instead of being afraid, which I thought she was going to be really worried about the sound of the spray, instead she leaned toward me. It felt so good to her. And horses just don't do that. They're very protective of their eyes because it's an instinct. And she just leaned over like, oh, this feels so good. So I thought, oh, isn't that sweet? This is wonderful. Not knowing what was going to happen the next day. But she had one application. Again, I was very generous with it, and I just drenched her whole side of her face practically. But she only had one application. Usually it takes about 5 to 7 days, just like kind of a normal cold with a kid. It takes that long to clear up. This is the next morning. She came in and her eye was open and clear and absolutely 100% dry, perfect, like she'd never had a bit of problem. And she obviously felt so much better. It was wonderful. So that really impressed me. I thought that was wonderful. So then it occurred to me, now you might think I'm a little slow at this, but remember this was early on and none of us really knew the capabilities of these wonderful products. So right across the aisle from her was another little bit more serious problem we were having, again with an eye. We had a 2-year-old colt that banged his eye about 3 days before out in the field, and he had sliced, you can see the stitches right here on this one, but he had sliced he popped his eye open all along this whole orbital ridge. So he had a pretty extensive laceration on his eye. The vet stitched it shut, but he said, stitched the laceration shut, but he said, you know, the stitches probably aren't going to hold because he's going to swell so badly. And boy, was he right. The entire eye was just, I'm not exaggerating when I say it was about the size of a softball. It was just this big bulge on the side of his face. His eye was almost completely shut. You could just see a tiny little bit of his eyeball there. And the skin that was showing through this, the stitches were spreading, and the skin that was showing underneath was real red and angry, and he was miserable. Poor guy. He was just felt sorry for himself. So I thought, well, again, at the very least, I'm going to spray his whole eye. I'm going to, it'll help. I'm sure it'll at least clean it up, and it'll help him feel better. And again, this is a 2-year-old colt who have a tendency to be a little more fractious than younger horses. And I thought he might not like the spray as well. But just as soon as he got used to the sound of the spray, and I got where I could put the product on his face, he did the same thing she did. It was the neatest thing. He just leaned over and he went, oh, like he just loved it. It felt so good to him. And I drenched his whole face and the entire area that was swollen. And he was inside all day. So we treated him probably 4 times during that day and just drenched it. The next morning when I came to the barn, I immediately made a beeline for a stall because I wanted to see how it was. And it was remarkable. Now, it wasn't completely healed. I'm not going to tell you that, not like the filly, but his eye was open almost 50%. The swelling, I swear, was down at least 50% and probably more than that. And the stitches, of course, were still there. The skin was still up. The tissue underneath was still obvious, but it was a much, much quieter pink looking, and it was kind of a healthy pink color. And he looked so much better. So of course we continued to treat him and administer as much as we could remember to keep going in his stall and spraying his eye. And within about 5 days, we took the stitches out, which was much earlier than usual. And within 10 days, it was, again, this beautiful, clear, wonderful eye. He still had a little bit of a line, but within another week or so, you couldn't even tell he'd ever had a problem. And that was a really pretty serious cut on his head. So that was wonderful. And one of the most beautiful things about that is how much they appreciate it and how much they love that. So as opposed to poking something in the corner of their eye that's all, it was just a wonderful experience. I love that. So now I get to tell you about our horse, Z. He was a member of our family for many years. My husband's grand passion in life is steeplechasing, which is racing over fences. So even though we train for other people and get paid to do that, we also own a couple of our own horses that my husband steeplechases. Z was he was a great guy. He was a wonderful member of our family for quite a while, but he had a problem when the fitter he got as we were training him for racing, which is a pretty strenuous sport. So he got fitter and fitter. He would get more and more nervous, and he would go off his feed, and his droppings would get really loose, and his hair coat would get kind of dull, and he would get very nervous. Like every time you put saddle and bridle on and took him out to exercise him, he would jig and he would trot, and he would just be like a live wire. And you knew he just didn't look like he was happy, and it bothered us, but we just kind of figured that was part of who he was. But this anxiety was coming along. In the meantime, I kept hearing about our product, these molecules helping people with anxiety issues. And I thought, let's just see what happens if we give him some of these wonderful molecules. I know I can't hurt him. So I was kind of faced with a dilemma, because when you give a horse orally, when you shoot it in their mouth, everything that's made to be administered to a horse orally, supplements or medication of any kind, it's put into a real sticky paste, because they're going to try to spit out anything you put in their mouths. So you can put the syringe in and you can squirt the substance into their mouths, and then it'll stick to the sides of their mouths and they can't spit it out. Well, of course we can't do that with our products, because we can't mix it with anything. And every time I tried to give him some in his mouth, I could hold his head up for a while, and of course it was absorbing, but as soon as I dropped his head, he'd spit some out, which just killed me. So I thought, he's not getting enough. So a friend of mine in another state that was working with his horses, he figured out that there's a lot of things that you do to treat a horse that's done rectally. And he figured, well, the rectal tissue is just as absorbent as the mouth, and we all know that these redox molecules do not have to be metabolized in any way. They're absorbed through the tissue and go immediately to whatever cells are imbalanced in the body. So if I could put it into him rectally, then they would get through the rectal tissue very quickly, and they would go wherever they needed to go. So I thought, well, that's kind of a cool idea. So I administered 4 ounces in the morning and 4 ounces at night rectally. And within 5 days, it was a remarkable change. Within about 5 days, he started eating really well. His whole face changed. You can see here he's got a real happy look on his face. That's because he's winning this race. He's very competitive. But this is the face we saw in the morning when we went to his stall. He'd eat well. His droppings got to be completely normal. His coat picked up and got a shine back to it. And best of all, he would walk out happily with his ears pricked up like this to do his exercise, and then he'd train really hard and really well, and then he'd walk back to the barn so comfortably and so quietly. So it was wonderful to see how much this changed his whole countenance. It was really beautiful. Sadly, he had a career-ending injury about 2 weeks later, so he now has moved on to become someone else's fox hunter, and I no longer have been able to continue with his redox molecules, but it was a wonderful experience that we had for him, and it was fun to be able to make him feel so much better with something that is so natural to his body. This is another filly that came in. She came in, this picture on the left, and actually it looks better than it did. By this time I remembered these are my photographs, and I remembered to take the pictures. Except we cleaned it up. It was actually oozing and bleeding freely when she came in. And this was 6 weeks old. They had tried every kind of prescription ointment and salve and everything to try to stop this fungus on her ankle, and they couldn't figure out how to make it better. It was very, very sore. This is after cleaning it up with iodine soap, and when I remembered to take the picture. By this time, our product had come out in a gel form. So we had a redox molecule gel that was even more concentrated than our liquid. So I started applying that to her ankle. And this was literally 5 days later. Now remember, this is 6 weeks they had been working on this, and this is what it looked like when she came to me. This is 5 days after using our redox signaling molecule gel. So, and within another 4 or 5 days, it was totally, completely healed, which I didn't think to take another picture of it being being healthy. But anyway, you get the picture, and that was wonderful too. So that little blue spray bottle and that gel is absolutely a staple in our barn. It's the first thing we reach for every single time. Now, my last and most impressive story, I think, is coming up. I have this little caution here because if anyone is a little queasy stomached about blood, these are very graphic photos. They are the real photos of this horse's real injury and his surgery. So if anybody's a little queasy, I apologize, but just close your eyes for this part. This is a friend of mine who had a horse, and she was really smart to document everything. So these are her notes and her pictures. On January 9th, this horse was turned out in a field, and he and his buddy got to running around, and they ran through the fence, and the fence broke, and one of the panels of the fence just got impaled into the horse's chest. A chest wound on a horse is really, really hard to heal because every time they move, it opens that tissue, and the muscles of his chest move, and so it's really hard to heal. You have to try to keep them still quiet for a long period of time, which is much easier said than done with a horse. So this is the vets trying to suture it up, many, many layers. And then this is the final product with a drain here that's draining out it's allowing it to drain as it supposedly heals. And he insisted that this horse was going to need complete stall rest for 6 months. That's really hard on a horse. That's like you being locked in a closet for 6 months. That's really, really hard. But that's the only way to get this to heal so that he would be healthy again. So this is January 24th. This was January 9th. January 24th, which is approximately just about 2 weeks later, all the stitches split open. So this is 2 weeks after the initial after the initial injury. And you see that almost no healing has been done at all, because as soon as the skin separated and the stitches split open, there is no healing here. So this is after 2 weeks. That's about the time she called me. And on the 27th, which is 3 days later, she started what I suggested, which was drenching this whole area in, again, using that wonderful little blue spray bottle and just drenching it in our liquid redox supplement. And she was very, very, she put a lot on. She was very generous with putting the product on, and she did it very liberally morning and night. On February 5th, she took this picture, which, as you can see, now again, remember, this was 2 weeks after the injury. This is only, 9 days later, and you see how the wound is granulating, it's filling in, it's healing from the inside out. It looks much, much better. But this is the beautiful part. The 14th, which is 3 weeks after starting the redox molecule treatment, this wound is completely closed up, and better yet, 2 months after his original injury, he was totally and completely fine, and he was ready to go out of the barn, which is just a huge gift to him. So that was a pretty remarkable, and I saw this during the time, but she thought to document it, which I was so pleased that we had this to share. So those are my stories. Every single species of animal on Earth can benefit from these wonderful redox signaling molecules. This is our front yard with more of my furry family get redox molecules every day. So please feel free and liberally share with your pets and your animal friends.